Why Germany's economic miracle is quietly dying. The phone rang at 4:12 a.m. in Wolfsburg. A plant manager stared at a dashboard that used to show predictable orders. Overnight, 3 of his biggest clients cut volumes for next quarter, and a software recall warning flashed red on another screen. Hold production changes, the email read. Outside, a half-finished charging hub stood dark. He knew it in his stomach, the old rules weren't working. Germany's miracle, precision built on cheap energy, perfect logistics, and cars people waited months to buy, had slipped. The question now wasn't when it happened. It was how no one noticed until the floor shifted. The model that worked until it didn't. To understand why that screen turned red, go back to a different Germany. The factories ran like metronomes. A diesel sedan rolled off the line, and somewhere in Shanghai, Chicago, and Stuttgart, the order book told the same story. The world craved what Germany made. The playbook was simple and ruthless in its efficiency. Energy was cheap and steady. Supply chains stretched with confidence. Apprentices filled shop floors, and engineers tuned hardware to the edge of perfection. The margins were earned in microns and minutes saved. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the background. The country made a bargain with geography and geology. Russian gas fed the blast furnaces, the crackers, the glass kilns, and the quiet heat under everything. Long-term contracts lulled executives into believing the price line would run flat forever. When they phased out nuclear, the calculus didn't look reckless, it looked tidy. Gas would bridge the gap while wind and solar rose. The plan worked until it didn't. The turn came brutally fast. When the flows choked in 2022, it wasn't just homes that felt the cold. Chemical titans scrambled for molecules, glassmakers counted days of furnace life, district heating systems bit their lips and rationed. In Berlin, decisions were measured in hours. Floating LNG terminals were secured in months, a speed that shocked even insiders. Subsidies landed like sandbags against a flood. It kept the water out, but the floor stayed wet. Prices didn't go back to yesterday, they stepped up and stayed there. This was the first crack in the model, a quiet, permanent shift in the cost base. For a machine built on precision margins, the difference between an electricity contract priced like France and one priced like the United States wasn't theory. It was the difference between investing at home or moving a line across the ocean. In the meetings that followed, the old arguments sounded thinner: heritage, clusters, proximity to suppliers. Then someone pulled up the math. Industrial power 2 to 3 times North American levels, plus a world where the key machines for tomorrow's batteries come with Chinese serial plates and potential export levers. The story of certainty began to fray. But the second crack didn't come from pipes or power. It arrived through the dashboard and the touchscreen. Germany had spent a century becoming the best in the world at the parts you couldn't see, the tolerances, the quiet purr at 160 km/h, the door thud that signaled craftsmanship. Then the car became a device. Suddenly, the parts you could see and swipe mattered more than the ones you could admire on a CAD drawing. Over-the-air became table stakes. Voice assistance, seamless phone integration, battery management you never had to think about, these weren't features. They were the product. Here's where it hurt. The first wave of German EVs had the bones right: ride, build, safety, and the software wrong. Clunky menus, updates that bricked functionality for a slice of owners. The moment a customer sat down and connected their phone, 85% of them preferred Apple CarPlay or Android Auto to the native system. That stat traveled boardrooms like a rumor that wouldn't go away. In Wolfsburg, Stuttgart, and Munich, plans were redrawn: unified platforms, centralized software, hire like crazy. Except the talent map didn't tilt in their favor. Roughly 15% of R&D headcount in European OEMs sat in software. The new rivals had north of 40%. That wasn't a hiring gap, it was a structure. Meanwhile, the buyer shifted. Subsidies that had greased adoption were pulled in December 2023. In 2024, battery electric registrations in Germany fell 27%. Market share stepped down from 19 to 13.5%. Charging points lagged the fleet. The infrastructure curve trailed the adoption curve just enough to put doubt in a commuter's mind. Even as 2025 opened with a fresh bump in registrations, the story had already changed. This wasn't a straight line to an electric future. It was a choppy sea, and software defined the waves. Inside the auto giants, responses came fast and contradictory. Spend tens of billions on electrification and software. Partner with Chinese innovators while competing with them in showrooms. Promise an operating system that would finally knit everything together, then delay, then recall, then patch. Launch a sub-Euros 25,000 EV to meet the street, while reminding investors that premium was still the soul of the brand. It was triage with a long-term plan taped to the wall. But the model that worked wasn't just cars. It was the quiet army behind the brands, the Mittelstand, the hidden champions that built the machines that built the things. For decades, they stitched Germany into supply chains so reliable that purchasing managers stopped thinking about them. Niche leaders in metallurgy, vacuum systems, sensors, tooling, world-class, family-owned, rooted. The gas shock rattled them too. So did interest rates that made new lines feel heavier and compliance rules that ask small teams to act like multinationals. They could survive higher costs in the short term. What gnawed at them was the question of tomorrow. Where do we place the next bet? Across the Atlantic, a siren sounded like a spreadsheet. The Inflation Reduction Act didn't sing in slogans, it whispered in line items. Tax credits for clean manufacturing, cheaper power, permits that didn't drag into a third calendar year. If the US was a faraway market before, it started to feel like a neighborhood. German investment there had been rising for years, but now the curve steepened. If you were a mid-sized machinery firm supplying battery lines or heat pumps, the map suddenly had a bright circle over Ohio, Texas, the Carolinas. Clients were building there, so you followed. By the time the plant manager's screen flashed red, the model had already changed. Energy was pricier, software was central, demand was more fragile, the famous clusters still mattered, but they no longer guaranteed the next decade. The miracle hadn't vanished overnight. It had drifted degree by degree until the moment came when every incremental fix added up to a new reality. And that's where the story turns, because cracks don't just break things, they show where the load really is. The Russian gas bargain, lifeline turned liability. 3 decades earlier, executives called it elegant. Pipelines stitched Eurasia to Germany's boiler rooms. Names like Druzhba and later Nord Stream sounded almost benign, like infrastructure you could set and forget. Contracts ran long indexed to oil with clauses that made CFOs sleep well. Gas wasn't just another input, it was the hidden muscle under Germany's industrial rhythm. In Ludwigshafen, it cracked molecules into plastics. In the Ruhr, it tempered steel. In Bavaria, it kept glass furnaces alive through January nights. Apprentices learned that heat was a raw material, not just a utility bill. The bargain shaped strategy. Nuclear was phased out in stages. Wind and solar rose on the horizon. Gas would bridge the intermittency. On spreadsheets and in cabinet meetings, the bridge looked sturdy. Prices were stable. Russia wanted revenue as much as Europe wanted heat. The calculus didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like modern risk management. Then 2022 arrived and turned a model into a memory. Flows fell, hedges blew through. The market turned predatory, and simple things, like scheduling maintenance shutdowns, became acts of faith. Inside ministries, phones didn't stop. Within months, floating LNG terminals that would have taken years materialized at speed. The public saw ribbon cuttings, industry saw triage. Subsidies tried to keep energy-intensive plants above water, chemicals, ceramics, fertilizers. Ration plans were written, then quietly shelved when weather and luck cooperated. But the scar remained. Prices stepped up and didn't step down. Even with the LNG patch, Germany's baseline shifted. For firms competing with peers in the US or Canada, the spread mattered. Industrial electricity often 2 to 3 times higher. You could feel that delta in every feasibility study. The new math collided with new ambitions. Battery cells were meant to be Europe's next manufacturing prize, yet the cost stack stubbornly referenced energy. A kilowatt-hour of power priced wrong could swamp incremental gains in factory yield. And another vulnerability sat upstream of the meter, the machines themselves. The most advanced equipment for coding, calendaring, drying, and formation, critical to cell lines, came stamped from Chinese suppliers. A quiet dependence wired into procurement lists suddenly looked like leverage in someone else's hands. Export restrictions weren't hypothetical, they were scenarios boards modeled. Meanwhile, the bill for transparency and responsibility came due, not just in rhetoric. The EU battery regulation tightened the screws, mandatory recycled content targets, life cycle carbon disclosures, and a battery passport to trace materials through the maze. For a large OEM, compliance looked like a program. For a mid-sized supplier, it looked like a second job. Layer on Germany's Supply Chain Act, due diligence from mines to assembly, and the cost of building a battery line at home wasn't just higher because of power. It was higher because of governance that demanded receipts for every step. And there was the raw material trap. Even if a German plant hummed on cleaner power, the inputs ran through the same choke points. Over 70% of lithium, roughly 3/4 of cobalt, and more than 90% of natural graphite were refined in China. The words strategic autonomy featured in speeches, but the purchasing realities pointed east. A hiccup in refining or a tariff tweak reverberated directly into German cost curves. Decoupling was a slogan, diversification was a slog. On the ground, the effects were human and immediate. A glassworks manager weighed shutting a furnace, knowing a cold furnace can die for good. A fertilizer plant throttled back and watched importers fill the gap. A chemical site ran simulations on switching from gas steam to electric heat and hit the wall of physics and grid constraints. Some lines survived on subsidies. Others drifted into temporary pauses that stretched into seasons. In boardrooms, the question turned from how do we endure this winter to what does permanence look like? That permanence pushed decisions outward. If the US offered tax credits, predictable permits, and lower power, certain investments penciled out only there. If Poland or Slovakia offered cheaper energy and labor plus proximity to Germany's suppliers, another set of moves made sense. Home still had advantages, clusters of talent, quality, relationships, but the energy step change sat like a weight on every plan. The cheap gas era had hidden fragility behind efficiency. Without it, the model showed seams. The gas bargain wasn't a single failure. It was a concentration of risk that seemed rational until geopolitics priced it. Germany moved fast to patch the hole and in many ways succeeded. Lights stayed on, production didn't collapse, but the invisible subsidy of predictable, affordable heat had ended. In its wake, battery dreams looked pricier, compliance looked heavier, and the machine that ran on microns started grinding against costs it couldn't finesse away. While everyone argued about the bridge, the river had already changed course. The auto hinge from diesel dominance to EV disruption. For a century, the car was Germany's calling card. VW, BMW, Mercedes, names that turned engineering into identity. The win wasn't flashy. It was repeatable excellence, combustion tuned to velvet, gearboxes that felt inevitable, cabins built like vaults. Diesel made the math sing, torque, range, margins. Then the ground moved. Dieselgate hit credibility, regulators tightened timelines, and the industry's center of gravity slid from cylinders to code. The product stopped being mostly metal. It became a rolling computer, judged by screens, software, and what could change after you drove it off the lot. China didn't just become a market, it became the magnet for the supply chain. BYD and a wave of domestic EV makers proved speed and scale could live together. Tesla set a global benchmark for over-the-air updates and user experience that felt unburdened by legacy. The hierarchy flipped. Hardware perfection still mattered, but the differentiator lived in the invisible: battery management, driver assistance that learned, interfaces that obeyed without friction. German excellence at 160 km/h met a test at 0 km/h. When you tapped a screen and waited. Battery cells exposed a structural dependency. Asia had the head start. Germany's late pivot meant the inputs for cathodes and anodes still traveled through the same refineries. More than 70% of lithium, about 3/4 of cobalt, and over 90% of natural graphite processed in China. Localizing production wasn't just about factories, it was about power. With industrial electricity often 2 to 3 times North American levels, the cost stack for a gigafactory at home felt heavier. The EU battery regulation added needed accountability, recycled content, life cycle carbon, the battery passport, but also new layers of documentation and cost that small suppliers had to absorb. Then came the software reckoning. Owners praised ride and build, but cursed menus that hid basics and updates that broke what used to work. A data point cut through all the euphemisms. 85% of users preferred Apple CarPlay or Android Auto to native infotainment. That wasn't a gentle nudge, it was a verdict. Volkswagen wrestled with recalls and data security issues in 2024. The plan to unify on SSB and an in-house operating system made sense on whiteboards, then ran into delays and complexity. Meanwhile, the rival talent mix told its own story. Roughly 15% of R&D at European OEMs specialized in software, while new competitors stacked their teams with 40% or more. You can't patch that gap, you rebuild for years. Demand didn't cushion the transition. When the Umwelt bonus ended in December 2023, the mid-market felt it first. In 2024, battery electric registrations dropped 27%. Market share stepped down from 19 to 13.5%. The charger map didn't calm nerves. About 150,000 public points for roughly 1.65 million EVs, a ratio that made every long-distance plan a small project. Early 2025 brought a pulse, over 100,000 new EVs registered and momentum in premium pockets. But the signal was noisy. Buyers were sensitive to price, infrastructure, and the promise that software bugs wouldn't turn a commute into a test. Inside the automakers, the response mixed urgency with contradiction. Volkswagen committed €73 billion across 2021-2025 for electrification and software, promised a sub-Euros 25,000 EV, and reached across to Xpeng in China to accelerate tech. BMW's new class, slated for 2025, aimed for a clean break. Modular, software-centric, designed for updates as a habit, not a special event. Engineers debated open-source middleware to reduce complexity and cost, while brand leads worried about losing differentiation in the layers customers actually touched. Strategy memos paired own the stack with partner aggressively, a useful paradox when the clock is loud. Exports added their own twist. China was still an essential market and also the most dangerous arena. Price wars punished anyone slow to cut costs or trim features. European share drifted under pressure from imports that bundled acceptable hardware with solid software at sharp prices. Looming 2025 EU CO2 targets set a trap. Miss the fleet numbers and margins get clipped by fines, hit them with discounts, and the P&L bleeds anyway. The spreadsheet never told the whole story, but it never lied about math. On the ground, the human moments told the arc better than slides. A dealer explained to a loyal E-Class driver why lane keeping prompted uncertainty rather than confidence. A software team shipped a patch overnight to restore climate controls, then held its breath. A battery engineer stared at a yield chart, knowing a half-point improvement could buy time against an energy bill they couldn't move. A product manager watched a focus group reach for their phones and mirror CarPlay within seconds, bypassing the native system they'd spent 2 years defending. There were wins, just not in a straight line. Over-the-air updates stabilized, interfaces simplified, range crept up without the old weight penalty. Partnerships in China opened doors to faster iteration and local tastes, but the Hinge was real. The old Germany won by shaving friction out of metal. The new game asked it to shave friction out of code at speed in public. That requires different instincts. Ship earlier, fix live, instrument everything, accept that perfection is a moving target you chase rather than an object you deliver. What changed first was perception. The moment a car felt like a responsive device rather than a stubborn appliance, buyers relaxed their shoulders. That feeling, not a brochure spec, decided whether the badge still meant best. German engineering didn't stop mattering, it just moved. The test wasn't whether a door still thudded right, it was whether the system behind it behaved like it understood you. Mittelstand under pressure, the hidden champions squeeze. If the car makers are the stage, the Mittelstand is the machinery in the wings, the quiet force that makes the show possible. Family names on factory gates, fourth-generation owners who still park in the same spot, apprenticeship masters who can read a tool's health from its tone. They built the jigs, the lasers, the vacuum pumps, the metrology rigs. They turned German reliability into a product you could export. And now you can hear the strain in their calendars. The first hit was cost. Energy wasn't an invoice line, it was oxygen. When industrial power prices settled 2 to 3 times higher than in the US or Canada, energy-intensive SMEs felt it in every shift. A powder coating line that ran nights to catch lower tariffs suddenly made less sense. A heat treat furnace burned profit as much as gas. Margins that lived on single-digit percentages didn't bend, they snapped. Logistics added friction. Metals and specialty chemicals swung in price like weather. Each procurement cycle felt like a small negotiation with volatility. Money tightened at the same time. Zero interest had trained a generation to think in long capex arcs. That era ended, banks grew careful, appraisals got conservative. A new 5-axis machining center or an automated cell that used to be a 12-month decision now stretched to 24. Not because the tech didn't pay back, because the headroom was gone. Owners started staging investments. Retrofit one bay, defer the second, wait for the energy contract to renew. Survival became a project plan. Compliance arrived like paperwork with teeth. Germany's Supply Chain Act pushed due diligence all the way to mines and smelters, right on principle, heavy in practice. The EU battery regulation added a battery passport, recycled content thresholds, and full life cycle carbon accounting. The big OEMs could hire teams. The supplier with 280 people and 2 controllers could not. A CEO who loved walking the floor now spent Tuesday mornings reviewing audit templates and traceability software demos. Talent didn't fill the gaps. The apprenticeship pipeline thinned. Skilled millers and toolmakers retired with hands that knew things you couldn't write down. Recruiting 20-year-olds into precision trades competed with jobs that promised remote work and clean sneakers. Universities supplied engineers, but software and data pulled them toward platforms, not pumps. Owners started looking at succession slides with a knot in the stomach. Who runs this in 10 years, and where do we find the next Meister? That's when the map shifted. The offshoring calculus changed from if to how. Clients were building battery plants, heat pump factories, and grid hardware in the United States, pulled by the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits and cheaper power. For a German sensor company or a coating equipment maker, proximity wasn't a buzzword, it was a purchase order. German foreign investment in the US had been rising for years, roughly 7.6% compounded over the past decade, but the intent hardened. Surveys showed 95% of German firms expecting U.S. growth in 2025 and 88% of German subsidiaries planning to expand their American workforce by 2029. The middle of the country, Ohio, Tennessee, the Carolinas, turned from pins on a trade show map into addresses. Central and Eastern Europe remained the closer option. Poland, Czechia, Slovakia offered cheaper energy, skilled labor, and a truck day away from headquarters. A sheet metal specialist could open a satellite near Wrocław and keep German engineering close. But the US offered something different: incentives that stacked, permits that moved, customers who wanted a local supplier to unlock their own credits. If you made anode mixers or laser welders, the siren wasn't ideology, it was margin. All of this sat on top of a battery supply chain reality that nobody could ignore. Critical mineral refining was concentrated. Over 70% of lithium, roughly 75% of cobalt, more than 90% of natural graphite flowed through Chinese plants. The majority of advanced cell production machinery, coaters, slitters, formation equipment also leaned east. Mittelstand firms that wanted to anchor battery-related business in Germany were squeezed by power costs on one side and upstream dependencies on the other. You could localize assembly. You couldn't localize a refinery with a purchase order. On Tuesdays, a sales lead in Baden-Württemberg met a US utility-scale storage developer on Teams. On Wednesdays, a production manager in Thuringia ran a Kaizen on energy waste, shaving kilowatts at the margins. On Thursdays, the owner drafted a memo to staff. A small line in Georgia, a service hub in Michigan, no layoffs at home. The language bent over backward to say the thing nobody wanted to say, we're hedging. There were bright spots. Process nerds found savings in compressed air leaks and oven cycles. Digital retrofits turned old presses into data sources, catching drift before scrap appeared. A few firms won big contracts precisely because they could certify every gram of cobalt and post a clean carbon score. Reputation still mattered. Precision still traveled. But the squeeze is real. The hidden champions are being asked to stay rooted and spread roots abroad to maintain the old cluster advantages while building new ones in unfamiliar soil. They can do it, they've adapted before. What they can't do is pretend the numbers haven't changed. The miracle they supported ran on trust in energy, in orders, in people. Rebuilding that trust now requires a different kind of precision, picking the markets, the partners, and the bets that keep the core alive. Demographics, the workforce cliff. Walk into a mid-size factory at shift change and you'll see it before anyone says a word. The gray and the beards on the morning crew, the empty spots on the apprentice bench, the maintenance chief who swears he'll retire next year but keeps pushing the date because there's nobody to hand the keys to. Germany's economy was built on a promise. Every generation would refill the bench. The math is breaking that promise. The curve started bending years ago. Birth rates slipped quietly at first, then steadily. A whole cohort took the message to study longer, enter later, and aim for jobs with cleaner hands and clearer hours. None of that is wrong. It's just misaligned with a machine that needs people who can read a sound in a spindle and tune a sensor by feel. Median age rises, retirement letters stack up, and the pipeline thins where it hurts most. Skilled trades, tool-making, industrial electricians, process technicians. Owners tried to get ahead of it. They sweetened apprenticeships, modernized training floors, added software modules to lure kids who grew up on screens. It helped, but it didn't reverse gravity. Immigration could, in theory. In practice, the politics run hot and the bureaucracy runs slow. Recognition of foreign credentials nags at the edges. Even when the visas come through, housing, language, and integration put friction on urgency. You can't onboard a master miller in a week. Culture takes time and orders don't wait. So companies do the thing they can control, upskill. Surveys read like a confession. Around 7 in 10 employers prioritize reskilling their own teams. That means a welder learning basic PLCs, a line lead running data checks between batches, a logistics coordinator taking a crash course in customs and compliance. It works, especially in firms that already breathe continuous improvement. But it pulls from a shrinking pool, and it asks veterans to become teachers while still hitting their numbers. Meanwhile, retirements hit like quiet earthquakes. In advanced economies, the imbalance is stark. In the US, projections show 18.4 million experienced, post-secondary educated workers retiring this decade, with only 13.8 million similarly educated entrants replacing them, a 4.6 million gap before new demand. Add fresh job creation and the shortfall climbs past 5 million. Germany's structure differs, but the warning is clear. When experienced hands leave faster than skilled newcomers arrive, productivity doesn't drift, it drops. Automation is the obvious counter. Robots don't take vacations and software doesn't call in sick. Many SMEs added cobots to 10 machines, vision systems to catch defects, and MES layers to stitch data together. Gains are real, scrap falls, changeovers tight, but the ceiling shows up quickly. A robot is an amplifier, it needs a human who knows the song. Capital intensity bites harder when interest rates are higher and power isn't cheap. You can automate a cell. You can't automate wisdom. Wages adjust in the only direction they can. Scarcity raises the price of skill. A good industrial electrician can pick among offers and ask for predictability to match pay. That's fair and overdue in many places. But exported products live in markets where rivals don't share the same labor math. Margins feel the pinch. Owners who once solved with efficiency now juggle schedules, bonuses, and flexible shifts to keep people. They win some, they lose some. There's a softer strain nobody writes into the model. Pride. Pride in the craft. In the signature, a well-run shop leaves on a part you can't see once it's installed. When the average age on a team climbs past 50 and nobody shows up for the open day, that pride phrase, managers become part-time recruiters. Teams carry vacancies like ankle weights. Projects slip because the only person who can debug that 40-year-old control board is also the one mentoring 3 apprentices and spending Fridays filling out compliance checklists. Policy tries to meet the moment. Programs support training, speed up visa lanes, nudge underrepresented groups into technical careers. Some work, but continuity needs time. Education tracks need a decade to show up in headcounts. Immigration needs consistency, not just headlines. Meanwhile, factories run daily. On a Tuesday afternoon, a master machinist in Saxony stands with a 19-year-old apprentice, both staring at a worn jig. The master explains a trick his own mentor showed him, a way to feel the alignment without a gauge. The kid nods, then asks if there's a video. There is. There's only time, repetition, and the decision to keep showing up. That's the cliff and the bridge in one frame. Germany can rewire energy, rebuild supply chains, and relearn software. None of it matters if the people who make things retire faster than the system replaces them. The miracle always lived in hands and habits. Right now, those hands are tired, and the habits are at risk of being archived instead of passed on. The next chapter depends on whether the country can make the hardest product of all, a new generation who wants this work and is allowed to master it. Energiewende, ambition meets physics and politics. The promise sounded clean. Retire the last reactors, build wind and solar at speed, wire the country for electrification, and let industry ride a greener grid to the future. On paper, the curve rose smoothly. In reality, the lights stayed on because engineers coaxed a system through constant trade-offs, one constraint at a time. The phase-out of nuclear didn't cause the gas shock, but its timing sharpened the edge. Baseload vanished just as volatility arrived. Plants that needed steady steam found themselves matching their heartbeat to weather. Permitting became the first bottleneck you could touch. Turbines stood ready on spreadsheets while applications idled in folders. A wind farm needed years of approvals, bird studies, neighbor meetings, grid access letters. Solar came faster, but not fast enough to cover winter. Meanwhile, the North built more generation than the South could use in a storm, and the lines that should have moved that surplus down the spine of the country lagged behind. Transmission got stuck in a trench between intention and execution. Grid operators learned a new choreography. Curtailment became a verb in ordinary conversation. Pay a wind farm to stand still here, dispatch a gas plant there, shuttle electrons across nodes that weren't designed for this much two-way traffic. The bill showed up as network fees and redispatch costs layered into industrial power contracts. A ceramics plant in Bavaria didn't care about modeling assumptions. It cared that a megawatt-hour cost more this quarter than the one before, with no new certainty attached. Inside factories, the physics pushed back. Process heat doesn't negotiate. Steel, glass, chemicals, these are temperatures, not aspirations. Swapping gas steam for electric heat wants infrastructure the grid can't yet promise at the scale and reliability industry needs. Hydrogen carried hope and pilot lines carry real learning, but the timeline insists on patience. You can design a pipeline in a quarter, you build it over years. Budgets live in the present. Battery economics absorbed all of this like a sponge. A cell line's unit cost breathes with power prices. Germany's ambition to host gigafactories met the arithmetic of kilowatt hours 2 to 3 times costlier than in North America. Engineers trimmed drying times by seconds, recovered heat, and tuned formation cycles with data. The gains mattered and still ran uphill. Every incremental improvement fought a headwind the Energiewende didn't intend but couldn't deny. Policy zigzagged with the court calendar. A ruling clipped the government's climate fund and programs had to be rewritten mid-stride. Companies chasing grants watched application windows shift and criteria tight. Then the most visible consumer lever, EV purchase subsidies, snapped shut in December 2023. Demand whiplashed. Battery electric registrations fell in 2024, and suppliers who had hired for ramp found themselves planning around gaps. In the premium tier, orders held better. Mid-market buyers hesitated. Competitors told a different story. The United States didn't offer a philosophy. It offered credits, power at industrial rates that steadied business plans. An accountant could pencil a project with the IRA and know which line items would hold for a decade. France leaned back on nuclear's steady hum. The Nordics married wind, hydro, and interconnectors into something close to a cheat code. Germany's edge, once assumed, had to be rebuilt against neighbors who weren't waiting. Charging infrastructure became the public face of private planning. Roughly 150,000 public points served about 1.65 million EVs, and the ratio set the tone for adoption. Early 2025 saw more than 100,000 new EVs registered, but drivers still texted friends before a long trip to ask which stations actually worked. In industrial parks, fleet managers ran spreadsheets on depot chargers, grid connection timelines, and transformer lead times. Electrification didn't fail. It stumbled over hardware and human trust. Yet in the mess, progress is real. A wind farm that once needed 7 years of paperwork now clears in 5. Grid projects that languished on maps have crews in fields. Heat pumps creep into warehouses once heated by fossil boilers. Battery suppliers lock in recycled content partnerships to meet EU rules and shave transport emissions. It's slower than slogans, faster than cynics admit. The hard part is the politics of sequence. Do you tax carbon harder before the alternatives arrive at scale? Do you subsidize power for industry without distorting signals? How fast can you move permitting without losing legitimacy with communities? Every answer makes an enemy. Ministers visit substations as often as they visit startups. CEOs spend more time in grid meetings than at trade shows. Everyone is negotiating with physics and patience. The Energiewende isn't failing. It's revealing the price of speed in a mature, export-heavy economy. Germany can land the plane, but it can't skip the runway. More lines, faster permits, contracts that let industry plan in 5-year blocks, not 5-month patches, and a grid that feels like a promise, not a bet. The ambition is right. The path is narrower than anyone wanted to admit, and still the only one worth walking. The euro, inflation, and the interest rate reset. For years, the euro felt like cushioning, an invisible shock absorber that smoothed over national bumps. Exports priced in a stable currency, financing at rates that made long arcs possible, and a central bank that kept volatility out of boardrooms. Then the ground shifted, the energy shock bled into prices, supply chains snarled, wages chased living costs. What had been a gentle background hum turned into a frequency executives couldn't tune out: inflation. Inflation changes behavior long before it changes numbers. A plant that used to buy copper on quarterly cycles started hedging monthly. Procurement wrote clauses about extraordinary circumstances as if they were ordinary. The European Central Bank watched price indices and did the one thing it could do at scale: raise rates. The intention was clear: cool demand, anchor expectations, bring the curve back down. The side effect was immediate. Cheap capital, the oxygen for precision investments, got scarce. Rate resets don't headline the way subsidies do, but they show up everywhere. A Mittelstand owner who penciled a €5 million automation cell at 1% financing suddenly stared at 4%. The payback stretched, the risk premium grew teeth, and the conversation in the kitchen office changed. Do we do it now? Do we split it in 2 phases? Do we wait until the grid connection for the new line is guaranteed, waiting one more often than not? That pause, multiplied across thousands of decisions, slowed the heartbeat of the miracle. Euro helped and hurt at once. A strong euro blunts imported inflation, energy, metals, components. A weaker euro sweetens exports. Machines priced in dollars look friendlier abroad, but exchange rates can't solve structural spreads. When industrial power sits 2 to 3 times North American levels, a softer euro can't close that gap. When financing costs rise, a favorable currency prints thinner margins on overseas wins. The euro remains a frame, the picture inside has changed. Households felt the same logic in different rooms. Mortgages reset, rents rose, supermarket bills stretched pay packets. Unions negotiated with a sharper edge and won raises that were justified by the past year's receipts. Firms raised prices where they could and swallowed where they couldn't. Inflation that began in gas and goods crept into services and wages, the sticky kind central bankers watch with narrowed eyes. Everyone was learning a new balance: protect purchasing power without spiraling into a loop that makes the cure worse than the disease. For export champions, the interest rate reset was more than arithmetic, it was strategy. Big bets, new plants, new platforms, new markets depend on a horizon. When the price of money moves fast, horizons contract. In autos, the cost of financing dealer inventory and consumer purchases ticked up, thinning demand just as EV incentives pulled back. In chemicals and equipment, customers delayed orders, a quarter here, a quarter there, death by hesitation rather than cancellation. The phone didn't stop ringing, it rang with caveats. Banks returned to forms of conservatism that felt like déjà vu. Collateral mattered more. Cash flow projections got haircuts. Covenants tightened. Companies that had grown used to refinancing as a formality now rehearsed Plan B and Plan C. Private equity sniffed around distressed assets, not with malice but with money that moves when others can't. Consolidation pressures rose quietly. The family firm with 2 sons who didn't want the business looked at offers they would have refused 5 years ago and said maybe. The ECB's job is miserable by design: set one price for money across economies that don't move in sync. Germany's pain was Italy's and Spain's recovery was France's. Raise too fast, you crush fragile demand in places just finding their feet. Raise too slow, you let inflation rot confidence in the core. The compromise was always going to disappoint everyone. In factories, nobody debated monetary policy. They lived its delays, the cost of a transformer, the lead time on a new press. The decision to lease instead of buy, to hire temporary rather than permanent, to push the maintenance window 1 more month. Amid the drag, there were adjustments that worked. Companies swapped floating for fixed where they could, locked in energy at calmer rates, and renegotiated supplier terms to share pain instead of absorb it alone. Finance teams learned to stack incentives, regional grants, EU programs, sustainability-linked loans to cheapen the stack back to viability. Treasurers who used to be back office moved to the table with product and operations. The spreadsheet became a map of survival. The question isn't whether rates stay high forever, they won't. The question is what the interlude teaches. Germany's miracle relied on thin margins amplified by scale, discipline, and trust. The inflation burst and the reset on rates exposed how finely tuned that engine was to cheap money and predictable costs. Rebuilding resilience means fatter buffers, slower paybacks that still get funded, and a tolerance for redundancy the old model treated as waste. It's expensive. It's also the price of sleeping through the next 4:12 a.m. phone call. Political gridlock and policy drift. While the engineers wrestled physics and the accountants wrestled rates, the people writing the rules wrestled each other. Politics turned into molasses. Coalition partners negotiated with themselves in public, and every compromise arrived half-melted. The result wasn't drama, it was drift. Programs launched with fanfare, then stalled in committees. Deadlines slid. Companies planning around policy found themselves planning around uncertainty, which is another word for cost. You saw it in the climate fund that vanished by court ruling. Money firms counted on was suddenly theoretical. Ministries rewrote timetables, relabeled allocations, and promised speed while agencies asked for more forms. EV subsidies are the clearest example. When the UMLT bonus ended in December 2023, officials called it necessary, consumers called it whiplash. The industry saw the lesson: if policy can disappear at the end of a quarter, you don't build a decade on it. Demand dipped in 2024, not because people hated EVs, but because they hated feeling like guinea pigs. Permitting reform became a ritual chant. Everyone agreed it needed to be faster: mayors, ministers, CEOs, farmers, until a specific project showed up and then agreement dissolved into process. A wind farm met a bird, a substation met a neighborhood, a battery plant met a zoning map that thought in earlier decades. To speed one line, someone had to sign away a comfort, and politics hesitated to ask for that signature. Each delay had a sponsor with a reason that sounded reasonable. Multiply reasons by regions, and the calendar won. Industrial strategy turned into a patchwork quilt. The US offered clear credits, France offered nuclear clarity, the Nordics offered cheap, steady power. Germany offered case-by-case exceptions, temporary relief, and announcements that tried to signal confidence without backing it with timelines that held. The Mittelstand, allergic to grandstanding, needed quiet predictability. Instead, owners learned to read between lines because the lines themselves kept moving. Coalition governance didn't help. One partner wanted fiscal prudence, another wanted green ambition, a third wanted social balance. All good instincts. Together they produced texts that read like truce documents. The intent was noble, the execution was mush. Energy price breaks appeared, were extended, then retired. Hydrogen roadmaps multiplied. Semiconductor subsidies ballooned for a few trophy projects while smaller firms waited for a callback. The message to investors was mixed. We want you here, but please tolerate our learning curve. Europe added its own layer of complexity. EU rules on state aid loosened, then tightened. A pan-European response to the IRA was promised, then parceled out. German officials argued in Brussels for flexibility while German companies begged in Stuttgart for clarity. The battery regulation, necessary and overdue, landed just as inflation and rates squeezed budgets. Compliance became the lever for transformation and a trapdoor for those without the staff to manage it. Policy tried to do everything, industrial, climate, social, through the same documents. That's efficient on paper and exhausting in practice. The signal that mattered most was time. How fast from announcement to application, how fast from application to award, how fast from award to money in an account. Firms compared those clocks across borders and drew conclusions the government didn't intend. If your project gets real faster in North America, you go, not because you want to leave, but because time is the only resource you can't hedge. Meanwhile, politics learned the wrong media lessons. A press conference could buy a weekend of goodwill. A ribbon cutting could buy a week. But the next quarter asked the same question the plant manager asked at 4:12 a.m. Can I rely on this? CEOs started sending deputies to photo ops and showing up quietly at grid planning sessions and city councils, the rooms where the future actually gets decided. That's not cynicism, it's triage. There were course corrections that worked. A few lenders set up one-stop shops for permits and meant it. A procurement reform shaved months off routine upgrades. Some ministers stopped promising finishes and started promising starts measured in weeks, not years. Where leadership aligned, projects moved. Where it didn't, the calendar kept winning. Policy drift isn't just inefficiency, it's a tax on belief. Germany's miracle grew from trust that rules held while you built. Right now, too many rules read like drafts. The fix isn't louder announcements, it's fewer, clearer commitments with dates the state hits without drama. If politics can make time predictable again, industry can handle the rest. If it can't, the next chapter gets written somewhere else. Offshoring 2.0, money and machines on the move. The second shift in Germany didn't happen on a factory floor. It happened on maps. In boardrooms and back offices, Germany started drawing circles where the math worked. The brightest circle was across the Atlantic. The United States wasn't promising a theory. It was offering rules you could underwrite, tax credits for clean manufacturing, cheaper energy, and permits that moved at human speed. For a country that built its identity on exporting machines, building some of those machines closer to the customer stopped being betrayal and started being prudence. Conversations that once ended with "will serve" from Germany now began with "what's the case for a line in Ohio?" The Inflation Reduction Act didn't talk loudly, it stacked quietly. A battery component earned one credit, domestic content earned another, final assembly unlocked a third. If your customer needed local suppliers to qualify, your German shop became a bottleneck in someone else's finance plan. So Mittelstand owners booked flights, walked plots in Tennessee, and called their bank managers from airport lounges. The data points told the story before the anecdotes did. German investment in the US had been rising at roughly 7.6% a year over the past decade. Surveys said 95% of German firms expected growth in the US in 2025, and almost 9 in 10 German subsidiaries plan to expand their workforce stateside by 2029. These weren't giants chasing headlines. These were machine tool specialists, coding equipment makers, precision sensor firms, the people who make factories work. The middle of America turned into their new neighborhood. The Carolinas for batteries, Texas for grid gear, Michigan for auto reinvention. Central and Eastern Europe offered a nearer hedge. Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, shorter trucks, familiar language of production, energy costs that didn't punch you every billing cycle. A sheet metal fabricator could set up outside Wrocław, keep German engineering leadership at home, and serve EU customers without customs drama. For many, that became Phase 1, split capacity, hold options. The US was Phase 2 when American customers asked plainly, "Can you be here so we can unlock our own incentives?" China required a different calculus, not a retreat, a redesign. De-risking meant dual supply chains where possible, friendshoring where it was. Components with geopolitical fingerprints got second sources. Software with data sensitivity got segmented architectures. A supplier who once bragged about a single global BOM now kept two on purpose. It wasn't efficient, it was survival. Battery optimism met caution in Europe. Projects paused when spreadsheets hit power prices. Insolvency notices and temporary suspensions among European battery startups sent small shocks through supplier networks. A German coatings firm that had tooled for one gigafactory watched a milestone slide and pulled technicians back to base. Another won a service contract in the US because the customer needed uptime and local headcount to satisfy auditors. These were not dramatic exits. They were adjustments, one purchase order at a time. Supply chains got rewritten with a pencil, not a pen. Just-in-time softened into just-in-case. A dual source became worth the carrying cost. Traceability wasn't a selling point, it was a regulatory entry ticket. The EU battery regulations, passport and recycled content targets forced new IT systems, new supplier audits, new logistics for end-of-life returns. The German Supply Chain Act layered human rights due diligence onto minerals and metals that cross a dozen borders. For a Mittelstand CFO, the compliance map became as real as the factory layout. Not all movement was plant concrete. Service hubs sprouted first. A sensor company opened a calibration lab in Georgia to shorten turnarounds. A laser welder maker hired field engineers in Michigan so customers didn't wait a week for a fix. Then came light assembly, kits shipped from Germany, final steps done near the customer. Only when volumes proved out did full lines cross the ocean. Owners wrote memos that strained to say two truths at once. We're committed to Germany, and we're investing abroad because that's where customers and policy point. The long-term risk sat in the background like a hum, hollowing. Clusters don't survive on headquarters alone. They need apprentices who see the future in the building next door, suppliers who can fix something at 6 a.m. and spill over ideas that travel at coffee speed. If enough new lines go elsewhere, the density thins. You can't measure it quarter to quarter. You notice it when a problem that used to be solved in a day takes a week because the expert moved. Still, offshoring 2.0 isn't the offshoring of the 2000s. It's not chasing cents on assembly wages. It's chasing watts, credits, and time. It's building second homes, not abandoning the first. The companies that do it well write a new kind of logistics, core R&D in Germany, pilot production near the engineers, scale where policy and customers make scale wise. They train for travel. They hire bilingual plant managers. They wire their ERP so a plant in Saxony and a plant in South Carolina see the same numbers by noon. Some evenings, a German owner sits at a motel desk in Ohio, answering emails from home while reading a county permitting checklist. It feels unfamiliar and necessary. Back in Stuttgart, a team reviews energy bids, grid connection dates, and a schedule that still hopes the local line will run. This is how a miracle adapts, one circle on a map at a time, one hedge that keeps the core alive while the world rearranges the rules. Historical echoes, Germany's past booms and breaks. We've been here before, different inputs, same feeling in the gut. In the late 19th century, coal and chemistry turned a patchwork of states into an industrial engine. BASF, Bayer, Siemens, names that stitched Germany into global supply chains before globalization had a name. The boom rode cheap energy, new science, and disciplined craft. Then war, hyperinflation, and a lost decade shattered the machine. Out of the wreckage, a lesson: prosperity is not a right, it's a system you maintain every day. Post-1945, the so-called Wirtschaftswunder looked like magic from afar and like routine up close. Marshall Plan money mattered, but the deeper engine was organization, co-determination on the shop floor, vocational training that turned teenagers into specialists, banks that thought in long arcs, and a currency reform that reset incentives. Energy was abundant and predictable. The Autobahn wasn't just concrete, it was a commitment to movement. Exports paid the bills, and the world's appetite for reliable machines did the rest. You could build a life on that rhythm. Then the 1970s arrived with an oil shock that felt strangely like a preview of today. Energy security went from backdrop to board item. Companies learned to squeeze waste, retool for efficiency, and diversify inputs. The Mittelstand flexed smaller, faster, closer to the customer. The brake didn't kill momentum, it changed the way firms drove. They cut weight, added gears, and found speed in process rather than volume. Out of constraint, a culture of continuous improvement hardened into instinct. Reunification was the next stress test. Overnight, the map doubled, but the grid's factories and skill bases didn't. West German firms took on the cost of stitching a whole industrial region back into the fabric. For years, it felt like drag. Then came the payoff: new labor pools, new markets, and a psychological reset that said Germany could do hard, long work and make it hold. The euro wrapped the wager in monetary stability. Interest rates fell, planning horizons stretched. The miracle gained a second wind without saying the word out loud. The 2000s brought a quieter Hinge, China's accession to the WTO, and the birth of a buyer that wanted everything Germany sold. Machine tools, cars, chemicals, the order books fattened. At home, labor reforms loosened a rigid market. Productivity rose, unit labor costs fell, and the country ran surpluses that made neighbors grumble and CFOs smile. It felt like equilibrium. But embedded in that run were the seeds of today's discomfort. Heavy exposure to one buyer, one fuel, and a model tuned to perfection when the weather cooperates. Every boom had its break, and the pattern repeats. An external shock forces internal change. The winners are the firms that treat constraints as design parameters, not excuses. After the oil shock, engineers built efficiency into the product. After reunification, they built flexibility into the organization. Today, the ask is different. Build software reflexes into companies that grew up loving metal. Build energy resilience into factories that assumed steady electrons. Rebuild the bench while the masters are still on the floor. There's also a cultural echo worth hearing. The miracle wasn't optimism, it was discipline. Apprenticeship hours, standards that bite, meetings where numbers matter more than adjectives. That discipline made the door thud famous and the failure rate on a spindle near zero. It can be repurposed. Software can be instrumented and iterated with the same rigor. Energy projects can be scheduled and inspected with the same intolerance for drift. The habit is there, the application needs updating. History also warns about comfort. Each time a break hit, the first instinct was defense: protect margins, protect headcount, wait for normal. Normal never returned, a new workable equilibrium did. The companies that moved early cut new tooling, learned new partners, trained differently, exited stronger. Those that defended everything lost quietly, then suddenly. The lesson isn't romance about hardship. It's a memo, the miracle is a verb. So when a plant manager watches a dashboard glow red at dawn, he isn't witnessing an ending. He's catching the moment before a pivot. Germany has rerouted before under worse conditions, with fewer allies and with less room for error. The echo is not nostalgia, it's a prompt. Booms reward excellence. Breaks reveal whether excellence can adapt. Microtory spine, a plant on the edge. 4:12 a.m. the dashboard in Hall 3 goes red. Martin, night shift supervisor at a precision coatings plant outside Ulm, wipes his hands and leans closer. Line 2 anode slurry application has tripped its energy cap for the hour. He knows what that means: either throttle back or pay a penalty that eats the margin on the week's biggest order. He radios Anya at utilities. She's already rerouting loads, breathing into the phone like she's running. "Give me 5 minutes," she says. He has 3. By 4:16, the maintenance chief, Kemmel, is at the panel. He taps through screens that show a picture of the entire building's heartbeat. Compressors spike when the coaters ramp. Dryers hiccup when the humidity drifts. He toggles a sequence they rehearsed after last winter's bills came in: stagger dryers by 90 seconds, slow the conveyor by 2%, pull one oven off peak. The line shudders but holds. The dashboard drops from red to amber. Martin exhales like he's been underwater. At 5:00, the first shift trickles in, apprentices knot their laces. A journeyman electrician named Heike rubs her shoulder and checks the job list. There's a retrofit on a calendaring station, better motor control to shave kilowatts, and a sensor fault on a formation rack. She smiles at the note someone scrawled on the whiteboard: kilowatts are euros. She's been saying it for a year. Now it's a joke that isn't funny. At 6:30, Lena from planning lays today's orders on the conference table. 2 lots for a battery customer in the Netherlands, 1 urgent batch for a German EV supplier who moved their launch forward, and a trial run for a US client who wants to place a service hub contract, if the plant can guarantee turnaround. They want stateside presence, she says, not looking up. If we don't, their credit chain does clear. The owner, Rolf, nods. He's 62 and not ready to say retirement out loud. At 7:15, a Teams window opens to a buyer in North Carolina. He leads with small talk about thunderstorms, then gets to it. The IRA paperwork needs local content. We'll split assembly, Rolf says. Kit's here, final steps there. We can stand up a small cell in Georgia within 6 months. The buyer's eyebrows lift. Can your grid handle the ramp? He asks, meaning Germany S. Rolf glances at a chart taped to the wall, the power contract in thick red marker. We'll make it, he says. He means we'll make do. By 8:00, the coding line stutters again. An alarm chirps. The room smells like solvent and metal warmed by hands. Kemal is already moving, his tool pouch a metronome on his hip. He swaps a clogged filter, checks a bearing with a stethoscope, and listens like a mechanic listens to an engine in a driveway. He hears the faint scrape that means a misalignment nobody else would catch. He tweaks a guide roller by a hair. The web quiets like a person who stops fidgeting when a friend touches their shoulder. At 9:30, HR runs an open day for apprentices. 15 students were expected, 7 arrive, 2 stare at their phones, 1 asks if there's remote work. The trainer, Maria, laughs softly. Sometimes, she says, and gestures to a tablet running machine diagnostics. She shows them the energy dashboard, the part where a small change saves a large bill. One kid leans in. He likes numbers. Maria tries not to memorize his face in case he doesn't come back. At 10:45, a compliance officer from Stuttgart joins a call about the battery passport. She needs proof of every input's origin, carbon intensity, and handling. Rolf nods through the checklist. He likes rules that make sense. He dislikes forms that think he has 3 extra people to fill them. We will manage, he says, and writes a note to call a software vendor that claims to make it easy. He knows that nothing worth doing is easy. Lunch smells like soup and stress. Hike sits with a 19-year-old apprentice, Jonas, and explains a trick for aligning a sensor without a second pair of hands. He records her on his phone with permission. She shrugs. You'll forget otherwise. He asks her why she didn't go into software. She says, this is software, it just gets dirty. At 2:00 p.m., a logistics email lands. A shipment of graphite additives is delayed at a port. The broker mentions inspections and a new export protocol. Rolf circles the sentence and underlines the word new. He calls the Dutch customer. We'll split the batch and drive part tonight, he says. The customer sighs, relieved and annoyed. Trust is a ledger they update every day. By 3:30, the US buyer pings back. If you can put 2 field techs in state by Q2, we sign. Rolf looks at Hike through the glass. She doesn't meet his eyes. He knows better than to ask. She has parents nearby, a garden, a rhythm. He writes hire US techs on the pad. His pen stalls on the S in techs. At 4:12 p.m., the dashboard threatens red again. The sun fades behind a warehouse and the grid shifts to its evening dance. Anya at Utilities calls before Martin can. I've got you, she says, and reroutes a bank of non-critical loads. The line stays amber. Everyone keeps working. The plant breathes. At 5:40, the owner walks the floor. He runs a hand along a guardrail worn smooth by years. He stops at a wall with photos, founders in black and white, a 1978 expansion, a party where everyone wore paper hats. He takes a picture of the wall with his phone. He texts it to his daughter who lives in Berlin and writes code. Worth a tour, he asks, 3 dots pulse. Maybe, she replies, then adds, send me the energy dashboard. He smiles, a small thing. The miracle he believes in has always been hands and habits. Tonight, it's a link and a yes that isn't a no. Europe's engine falters, continental ripple effects. When Germany coughs, its neighbors don't just reach for tissues, they rearrange their weeks. Freight forwarders in Rotterdam watch load lists thin by a day, then 2. A Polish stamping plant hears from a Bavarian customer that a launch slipped a quarter and reassigns crews. In northern Italy, a precision plastics firm that used to ship weekly to Baden-Württemberg now ships every 10 days and asks its bank for a softer covenant. The miracle was never only German. It was continental, stitched by habits and highways. Start with the map that matters, supply chains. German OEMs anchor webs that run east for components and south for finishes. When orders slow or shift abroad, those webs slacken. A Slovak gearbox supplier loses night shifts because a model change in Wolfsburg is delayed by software, not steel. A Czech casting shop that tooled for EV platforms learns that the Sub-Euros 25000 variant is now a 2026 story, not a 2025 one. These aren't cancellations, they're deferrals that feel like erosion. Ports sense it in container cadence. Antwerp and Rotterdam see fewer high-value exports tagged DE, more tagged US with German brand names, lines that once crossed the Rhine now cross the Atlantic. Rail corridors that funnel parts from Silesia into Saxony stay busy, but the headcount in German distribution hubs turns over faster, contractors replacing permanents as managers pad flexibility. It keeps the lights on. It dims the glow. The ripple shows up in investment boards from Barcelona to Brno. If Germany is hedging with American plants, caps, and credits, why should a Spanish battery packer bet on a German-centric supplier list? They start courting Korean cells harder, Polish enclosures, and French software partners. Europe's center doesn't collapse, it decentralizes. Some of that is healthy. Some of it undermines the clusters that once made the whole greater than its parts. Labor markets play tag. Skilled workers in southern Denmark who once commuted into Schleswig-Holstein for machine tool gigs find contracts shorter, and recruiters from Sweden call with wind turbine work tied to steadier grids. In Hungary, a logistics park that boomed serving German auto consolidations now signs e-commerce clients to fill slack. Wages stop racing, they jog. Apprentices in Austria eye mechatronics programs and ask quietly whether the German pipeline will carry them or whether they should tilt toward healthcare tech. Policy feels the wobble. Finance ministers who built budgets assuming German import demand will soak up their factories, output notice tax receipts soften. The EU's cohesion money was designed to pull the periphery up. Now it doubles as shock absorber when the core trims orders. Brussels fine-tunes state aid flexibility, letting countries backstop strategic projects while swearing not to start subsidy wars inside the union. The line is thin, guarded by communiques and late-night calls. Then there's the EV transition, a shared ambition with asymmetric pain. When Germany's subsidies vanish and registrations drop, suppliers in Slovakia and Spain who tooled for specific battery electric variants feel it as idle days. Charger rollout lags in many places, but the signal from Germany carries weight. If the biggest car market in Europe is cautious, mid-tier buyers elsewhere hesitate. Early 2025 deliveries tick up, yet the memory of 2024's dip hangs over procurement meetings in Turin and Lille. Energy spreads distort competition within the single market. France's nuclear backbone gives its foundries a steadier bill. Nordic hydro makes aluminum cheaper. Iberian solar shaves peaks. German firms pay more and pass what they can along the chain. An Italian buyer compares quotes and chooses the French casting not because it's better, but because the kilowatt hours underneath it are cheaper. The single market survives this, but it strains. Not all the ripples are negative. Some regions catch work Germany can't hold in the short term. Polish and Czech plants absorb overflow. Dutch and Belgian ports win long-haul logistics tied to US-bound gear. Southern Europe's grid upgrades accelerate as manufacturers chase projects with clearer timelines. A Portuguese copper processor signs its biggest contract in years because a German cable maker needs second sources to satisfy due diligence rules. But the center matters. A Germany that invests abroad without reinvesting at home leaves holes others can't patch with press releases. The fix isn't to tether neighbors tighter to a slowing hub. It's to make the hub faster again at the things only it does: tooling, integration, training, and to let the spokes own more. If Germany rebuilds trust in time, permits, grids, software cadence, the continent breathes easier. If not, Europe doesn't collapse, it drifts. And drift is the one thing this machine never did well. The rebuild, what a realistic pivot requires. Start with time. The old model assumed time was elastic, you could perfect, then release. The new model demands cadence, ship, learn, improve. That means every major manufacturer needs a product rhythm that treats software and hardware as one organism. A quarterly OTA beat, a 6-month feature set, a yearly platform refinement. Not as slogans on calendars, with teams measured by adoption and defect burned down, not slide decks. Then fix the stack where it counts. A realistic pivot accepts that not every layer needs to be proprietary. Own the experience, safety, and data architecture. Collaborate on middleware and non-differentiating plumbing. Open source cores for comms and base OS can cut integration time if you harden them with discipline. The win isn't purity, it's velocity without fragility. Pair that with a ruthless UX standard. If 85% of users prefer CarPlay or Android Auto, integrate it beautifully while you rebuild native systems to be just as intuitive. Earn your way back, don't trap people. Talent is the choke point. You can't close a 15% to 40% software skills gap with slogans. Redirect R&D headcount, not just budgets. Build dual ladder careers so a principal engineer can earn like a manager. Recruit where your plants aren't, Berlin, Lisbon, Tallinn. Create residency tracks that rotate top software hires through plants, test tracks, and dealers so they see failure states in the wild. And pay for speed, bounties for latency wins, safety fixes, and customer visible improvements that move the needle. Battery realism beats bravado. Germany should anchor process engineering, recycling leadership, and critical sub-process niches where it can outlearn competitors. Except that refining of lithium, cobalt, and graphite is still concentrated in China. Hedge it by locking long-term contracts with diversified processors and investing in EU-based refining pilots even if the first plants are small. For manufacturing, co-locate new cell lines where power is cheapest and cleanest, Nordics, parts of France, while building electrode, module, and pack excellence at home. Tie every cell line decision to an energy contract, not a press release. Power prices are policy as much as physics. If industry pays 2 to 3 times North American rates, the pivot needs a bridge tariff targeted at electro-intensive, export-exposed sectors with strict efficiency covenants and sunset clauses. Pair it with faster-than-fast permitting for grid reinforcements and on-site renewables, 180 days decision or an automatic provisional yes. Create standard designs for substations, transformers, and rooftop solar so approvals become checklists, not novels. If a city can issue a passport in days, it can sign off a standard rooftop array in weeks. Supply chains want maps, not slogans. Draw dual sourcing into contracts with clear triggers. Geopolitical events, export controls, or lead time spikes automatically shift volume to secondary suppliers. Fund SMEs to meet battery passport and human rights due diligence with shared services. Pooled legal, traceability software, and audit teams run as cooperatives. The Mittelstand doesn't need another webinar. It needs 2 specialists who can fix real compliance gaps in a week and leave templates behind. Offshoring too should be deliberate. Keep core R&D, prototyping, and complex integration in Germany. Build scale where incentives, energy, and customers align. Yes, the US, and yes, CE. Write it down as an operating model. Pilot at home, ramp abroad, iterate everywhere. Staff service hubs near key customers before they ask. 2 techs on the ground is sometimes the difference between a signed contract and a ghost. Use transatlantic footprints to pull learning back. Every field fix becomes a design ticket within 24 hours, not a quarterly report. Workforce is a product. Treat apprenticeships like a premium line, modern equipment, visible career ladders, and pay that respects scarcity. Fast-track skilled immigration for trades and software with a single, accountable lane measured by weeks, not months. Partner with unions on upskilling compacts. An hour a shift for training in exchange for verifiable productivity metrics and stability commitments. Capture tacit knowledge now, film the masters, codify the tricks, embed them in AR work instructions so a 19-year-old can pull wisdom on demand. Finance has to match reality. Encourage banks to underwrite energy efficiency and digital upgrades with risk-sharing guarantees tied to measured savings. Expand sustainability-linked loans that drop rates when firms hit carbon, uptime, and training targets. Make export credit contingent on software support plans, not only on physical delivery, so customers abroad buy a relationship, not a crate. And stop timing programs to election cycles. Commit multi-year envelopes with annual data-based gates. Finally, kill drift with dates. 3 national clocks that don't slip, permitting SLAs, grid connection timelines, and OTA certification turnarounds. Publish them, staff them, and let firms sue when they're missed. Replace 12 overlapping funding calls with 3 predictable tracks: speed, capex under 10 million euros, 90-day decisions; scale, strategic plans, 12-month decisions; and systems, grid, and digital rolling approvals. Measure ministers on cycle time, not podium time. The pivot isn't mystical. It's 1,000 aligned, boring choices made fast and audited hard. Ship earlier, fix live, buy electrons smarter, learn in weeks, protect the craft by modernizing the craft. If Germany does that, the miracle stops being a memory and becomes what it always was at its best, a habit. Crisis point: the next 24 months. Circle the calendar. The next 2 years decide whether Germany rewires its engine or watches it downshift for a decade. EV demand will wobble without stable incentives. If subsidies return in 2026, 2025 becomes the bridge year. Cautious buyers, premium holding, mid-market waiting for price and charging confidence. Automakers must ship cleaner software on a clock. Quarterly updates that fix bugs, shorten boot times, stabilize ADAS. While the new class in sub-Euros 25,000 launches hit windows, not press cycles. On batteries, the math won't blink. Projects in high-cost power regions either lock discounted electricity or move steps of the process north or abroad. Expect more module and pack lines at home, more cell capacity and cheaper grids. Suppliers that survive will harden traceability, secure Chinese exposed inputs with second sources, and lean into recycling partnerships to meet EU rules and win credibility with cautious customers. Grids and permits are the swing vote. If transmission approvals compress from years to months, industrial electrification plans proceed. If not, factories keep hedging with gas backstops and foreign footprints. Watch 3 dials: grid connection lead times, transformer deliveries, and standardized substation designs. If those numbers fall, sentiment follows. The Mittelstand will split strategies. A service hub in America here, a light assembly cell in CE there, while core engineering stays in Germany. The risk is cluster thinning. The counter is reinvesting at home in automation that pays back under higher rates and in training that keeps tacit knowledge alive. Expect quiet consolidation. Aging owners selling to peers, not strangers, to keep know-how in the region. Labor keeps the limit. Upskilling accelerates. Immigration lanes either speed up or firms stall. Watch apprentice intake and shop floor vacancy rates. If they stabilize, output can rise without heroics. If they don't, overtime becomes the tax on indecision. This isn't a speech moment, it's a stopwatch moment. Dates, not adjectives, will tell you if the pivot is real. What this means now: Germany's miracle isn't gone, it's on a timer that punishes drift. If dates hold, permits, grids, software cadence, the engine restarts. If they slip, momentum moves. Subscribe for the next chapter and jump to our deep dive on the auto software Hinge, what fixes UX fast and what still breaks at highway speeds.